Today's tea is Earl Grey Green. As you might be able to tell by the name, it's a green tea, the green version of Earl Grey. It is really light. I've been a fan of Earl Grey since forever, and this is a really nice way to be able to drink the same flavor of tea in the afternoon or the late afternoon. Hi there, my name is Georgia and I'm a third-year Japanese studies student at university in the Netherlands. Today I want to talk a bit about, is Japanese actually difficult to learn? I want to dive into a few points that I found difficult or easier and use my experience to kind of convey why you should not be discouraged to learn Japanese at all. Personally, before starting studying Japanese, I had the feeling that it would be super difficult, but now after 2 years I see things a bit differently because I think it's a beautiful and very interesting language to learn. First of all, I want to start with why people think Japanese is difficult. One thing that comes into play here is its differentness, not only in writing but also in vocabulary, grammar. Japanese is fundamentally different from a whole lot of European languages that I at least am used to. I've heard people say that they think Japanese sounds really fast, or that maybe it's a tonal language like Chinese and you need to learn several types of tones to be understood. Maybe learning to read characters or kanji might sound like a huge challenge. What you also often hear is that Japanese is a very context-dependent language and that its grammar is supposedly really complicated. So yeah, by telling my story, I want to clarify a bit what my thoughts are on these things. By the way, I should mention that I have been specializing in Japanese linguistics mainly and am now doing a minor in second language acquisition. So do expect a little bit of academic theory to get into this video, but I'll explain things in an easy manner, so no worries. So before I started university, I was already interested in Japan and Japanese language for a while. So I think half year in advance, I started listening to a lot of Japanese music. In addition to that, I also used to watch some Japanese dramas or YouTube street interviews in Japan. And I would add the English subtitles, or Dutch, but I guess I preferred English, and then watch those interviews with quite natural spoken Japanese, and then read the text in English underneath. I did not watch a lot of anime. I'm not such a big anime fan. I'm a bit particular about them, which is quite the exception in Japan studies. A lot of people come here because they are a really big fan of manga or anime. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think I'm quite an exception. But all in all, I think that this listening and this passive training of Japanese was really effective, and by listening to the language and seeing the translation at the same time, I think I already managed to make a bit of a connection between certain sounds, certain words, and their meaning. So a bit about listening. In my case, I could already understand some things before having officially studied any Japanese at all. The idea that Japanese is a really fast language is a myth. In class, we've been told that there's a difference between stress-timed languages and syllable-timed languages, and that people who are used to stress-timed languages tend to think syllable-timed are a bit fast because you're not used to it. In addition, I also think that a language can sound really fast when you're not yet able to distinguish sounds in that language. The same was the case with Japanese for me. It sounded like one big mass of words and I couldn't understand much. But as soon as I started learning some words, you kind of know where words end and start, and then it all kind of started sounding comprehensible. So when it comes to listening, you shouldn't be too afraid. As soon as you get into it, things will get easier really quickly. Another thing that really helped was a language exchange app called HelloTalk. And on there you can interact with native Japanese and talk in Japanese with them. I met a few people on there with whom I texted for months, I think. With one I was quite consistent, almost chatting daily. So what I would do was just type an English sentence in DeepL or Google Translate, then translate it into Japanese and then paste the Japanese sentence into the chat. I'm sure things must have sounded really weird for my language exchange partners at that time, but through texting like this, I got a bit more familiar with the characters, what phrases or words are used frequently, and that way I could already use some introductory sentences in Japanese, which was really nice and fulfilling. It really gave me a sense of accomplishment. Also, texting is a really slow process, so you can analyze the text and translate as much as you want in between messages, which allows for a more slow processing of the language, which is really accessible for beginners. And after that, I started actually learning how to read and write Japanese characters. Japanese characters actually exist out of 3 character systems, which are kana and kanji. Kana is a type of phonetic alphabet that reflects the sounds directly in writing, and they're kind of like syllables all pronounced at equal speed. For example, kaki, kuke, ko, sashi, su, se, so. Compared to a lot of other languages, Japanese does not have that many distinguishable sounds. What you would have to learn is 46 hiragana characters, the ones who look a bit more like soft and curly, and 46 katakana characters that look a bit more straight and are often used for foreign words. You can see them here as well. This would be a hiragana, and this tema would be katakana. It's difficult to distinguish at the beginning, but yeah, kanji, hiragana and katakana are all used on this textbook. Then kanji are, as you might know, basically Chinese characters, and there are quite a lot. However, after you start learning them, you'll realize that kanji exist out of compounds and radicals, which are basically tiny puzzle pieces that frequently reoccur in different kanji. So after you've learned the basic kanji, you start to recognize patterns, and it will be way easier to remember them. Another thing that's really complicated about kanji is that they tend to have multiple readings. For example, this says Nihon from Nihongo, which means Japanese, so this is Japan and this is kind of language. And in this case it's Nihon, but for example in different contexts it can also be pronounced like Nippon. And some other kanji might have way more readings, so that also remains a struggle for me. And then in September 2022, it was time to start my first year of university. We had a very profound teaching in Japanese grammar. We had text class and separate grammar class, and we would analyze Japanese texts and sentences to the core. And what happened was that I already recognized a lot of the grammar because I already heard them in passing on YouTube or in dramas, and this made it much easier to remember. There's actually also a theory in second language acquisition, which is called the noticing hypothesis. Of course, there's also a lot of critique against these theories, since second language acquisition is still kind of a mystery and we're not fully sure how it works and why some people learn faster than others. But in some cases, it's definitely true that if you notice a language phenomenon first and then learn about it explicitly in class, that it might be a lot easier to digest and to actually understand. Also, we used to do a lot of Dutch to Japanese translation in the beginning, and we'd explain why we chose certain translations in class and compare them. I think like this you can really see how Japanese is different from Dutch and how a lot of things are untranslatable. This is not only about grammar but also about concepts and the meaning of words in general. So it really gave me a good insight in how Japanese language is necessarily intertwined with its culture and way of thinking. It does not mean that it's necessarily more difficult to learn. However, it might take a bit more time. And for me, it makes Japanese all the more interesting. To explain a few things about grammar, Japanese grammar tends to be quite coherent and consistent, with clear rules and not too many exceptions, which is a really big relief, especially if you understand how Dutch grammar works. And also some aspects of Japanese are actually a bit simpler than in maybe your own language. Japanese has a very low amount of tenses. I think there's only 3, but in English or Dutch, for example, there's way more ways to express time in verbs. In addition, there's also no plural and singular in Japanese, so book and books doesn't exist, it's just hon. And its word order is actually also quite flexible. Some things that can be confusing though are particles. Particles are basically characters that mark the role of a certain word in a sentence. However, Japanese does not have a lot of particles, and some particles can be used for multiple situations. So as a learner of Japanese, I feel like it can be a bit vague or difficult to determine when to apply what particle. Also, Japanese verb conjugations are used for a different purpose. In English, it mostly depends on who the subject is, like I am, they are. However, in Japanese, you'd use the same verb for everyone, but the verb changes depending on whether something is or is not, like negation. Also, if you want to talk more respectful towards someone, you'd have to change your verbs into a different form. Or if you want to conjugate for politeness and you want to say, oh, instead of my friend is here, tomodachi ga iru, you'd say tomodachi ga imasu. So iru becomes imasu to make it more respectful. So in conclusion, when it comes to grammar, it's a lot of new things with some easier things and some more complicated things, but I definitely do not think it's illogical or unlearnable at all. And then getting into year 2 of university, things started getting a bit more complicated. We'd already started reading texts aimed at native Japanese speakers, like news articles, but they were slightly adjusted to our level, so we could gradually build up our knowledge until being able to read native level content at the end of the year. And my speaking abilities went a whole lot better because I met a Japanese girl whom I met up with and talked only in Japanese with. It was only then that I realized how difficult it was to speak, but she really helped me and I was able to express myself better. A bit about speech. The Japanese is not a tonal language like Chinese is. It does have pitch accent, which means that, for example, in Dutch as a stress language, voorkomen and voorkomen are two different words with different meanings, while in Japanese, hana and hana are also two different words. However, it's not as strict as in Chinese. Most people will be able to understand you perfectly well, even if you mess up most pitch accents of words. Also, pronunciation tends to be not that difficult. Kana, which I talked about in the beginning, are quite consistent in their pronunciation. In addition, because Japanese does not have a lot of sounds, it's very likely that most sounds in Japanese also are included in your native language. However, I do think English natives might have it a bit more difficult because they have less short or hard sounds. If in Japanese you say ta, an Englishman would maybe say ta and kind of make it longer. The same goes for the R sound. The English R is really kind of in the back of your throat, like R. While in Japanese, it's kind of a mix of a rolling R in for example, Dutch, like R, and a L. So it becomes a bit like D, like da, di, du, de, do. And then in the second semester of year 2, something really exciting happened, which was my exchange to Nagasaki for about 5 months. In this situation, in quite a rural place in Japan, I was kind of forced to speak Japanese in almost all situations. Like, people at university might not always speak English. You're expected to interact in English with teachers and university staff. And in addition, my housemates all did not speak English. And there were 2 Japanese and 1 Korean, which was a bit annoying when me and the Korean girl got into a conflict and she did not understand what I meant. It definitely helped me in my active usage of Japanese to get a bit of a feeling for the language. So as opposed to in the beginning, when the different word order and grammatical structure of Japanese felt really intimidating and difficult to produce fluently, these things became a lot more natural and easier, and I could just have conversations without being mentally exhausted all the time. Also, I learned a lot about pragmatics, how to use politeness in real-life situations, and understand the cultural side of Japanese a bit more, and how you talk to someone in what situation. In the beginning, I would have to switch between the polite register and the casual register of Japanese every day, and sometimes I would have spoken with people my age in casual language for the entire day, and when going to university I would accidentally keep talking in casual language to my teacher, or the other way around. Also, Japanese has a tendency to leave out the subject in a lot of cases, so it's not directly mentioned who is doing what, but you kind of need to know from context or from information that has been mentioned before. Of course, we also did this in English. If someone would ask you like, what are you doing today? You can say, going to the supermarket, and it would be clear that you are going to the supermarket, so you won't have to say, I am going to the supermarket. In Japanese, that kind of happens all the time. If you say, I'll be going to the supermarket, it's like going to supermarket. And that will be the same for everyone else. So he or she or they are going to the supermarket, so it's all going to the supermarket. And miscommunication can happen, but Japanese people tend to be really forgiving and helpful when you're trying to speak their language, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. So my grammar did not improve that much. However, my writing did get better since we had to do everything on paper, and that would require me to write kanji by hand. Not saying that the use of paper in any situation is a good thing, but it did help me a bit. And the remaining thing that was a struggle for me to communicate with people in Japan was vocabulary. Most of the words you're going to learn are completely different from your own language. You cannot kind of guess what a word means because of your native language. Like me as a Dutch person, I can guess a lot of meanings of words in English and German. And for example, if you know French, you can also kind of understand Italian and Spanish, and some words are really similar. However, in Japanese, such ability does not exist. There are kind of English loanwords that are really useful. Elevator would be erabeta, and you definitely understand what that means. Also in Japanese, there are a lot of homonyms that are words that sound the same but have different meanings or refer to different things, which can be really confusing because sometimes you think they're saying this while actually they meant another word, and you're having two different conversations at the same time, and yeah. So now we arrive at year 3 of university. At this point after my exchange, I consider myself to be conversational in Japanese, to the extent where I can almost always convey what I mean. If I don't know a certain word, I can just explain what I mean in simpler language. However, that makes my phrasing and wording a little bit awkward, unnatural, or maybe beginner-like. So in conclusion, I would definitely not say that Japanese is difficult per se, but that it's just very new, very different, and there's a lot to learn. However, from a linguistic standpoint, you could say that a language develops based on how humans use it and what feels natural to them, and it often changes for the better. So most languages that exist, they're logical for the human brain. So it's not like Japanese is illogical or impossible to comprehend. It is just another language. So the easy points of Japanese would be definitely listening, straightforward pronunciation, flexible word order, and sometimes simple grammar. Reading, if you don't think about kanji, and getting to a conversational level is also doable. However, things that I still struggle with are a huge amount of kanji and vocabulary, and also rules that are used in keigo and highly polite language, but also cultural nuances. And then I'm not talking about writing and remembering every stroke of every kanji. But please don't be discouraged to learn Japanese, because it's different and it opens up a whole new world. You kind of open new rooms in your brain for new concepts. You discover how people can think differently through a different language. You really are exposed to Japanese culture in a very profound way that you internalize through learning the language. So I think that's a really unique opportunity for personal growth and development, and I'm so happy I have started learning Japanese. I do know that everyone has a different language learning process, and not all people learn at the same pace or in the same way, so don't expect Japanese to be the exact way like I have described, because you might think about things differently and it's a unique process. So please like and subscribe, and hopefully see you soon. Bye!